proverb, I am because we are, is the foundation of the Acbn YouTube channel. Tap in for all of our remarkable content and ecosystem mobilization through the phenomenal practitioners and thought leaders we engage on this channel. In the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight to pull back the veil. Get ready for another amazing Acbn powered interview.
And sovereignty. And I just want to have our panelists introduce themselves as well. So if we could go around starting, I believe, who's here for Graham? You were here first, if you want to go ahead and start.
Thanks, Blessed. Great to see everybody. Graham Singh from Montreal, from the Trinity Centers Foundation, and looking at all kinds of questions around faith properties. And I'm also a minister in the Anglican Church. So great to be with everyone.
Thank you so much, Graham. I think, Mike, you were next. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. It's Mike Labbé. I'm from Toronto. I'm with a company called Home Opportunities, a nonprofit corporation, but more significantly with Community Wealth Cooperative, which has applied to CMHC for funding to produce a homeownership cooperative sector. So that my focus is cooperatives, my focus is housing.
Thank you. And do we have Isaac with us yet? I don't have names for everyone. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isaac Ololafe, President and CEO of Dream Legacy Foundation and Dreammakering. We're an asset management company in the real estate space, venture capitalist space, and in the foundation space. When it comes to real estate through Dreammaker Developments, we've developed and built residential and commercial properties around the GTA, from condos to boutique hotels to custom homes. And through Dream Legacy Foundation partnership with Dreammaker Developments, we're now moving into affordable housing and working with Black North and Habitat in regards to the homeownership bridge program in partnership with the federal government, and also in partnership with other private sector. We're looking into launching a rent-to-own program for 67 townhouses and also affordable rental program within the GTA. Nice to connect, everyone.
Very nice, thank you. Carla Leon, can you introduce yourself?
Great, I'm Carla Leon. I was the former Director of Innovation with the United Church of Canada for 10 years and launched United Property Resource Corporation, a fully owned for-profit development corporation by the church, now called Kindred Works, and really passionate about anything innovative. So that's why I'm here.
Great. And Adiola, are you here? Can you introduce yourself?
Adiola's running behind.
Okay, they're not here yet. Okay, no problem. Okay, so we'll get started with the questions. This one is for Isaac. We know Dreammaker Venture and Dream Legacy Foundation has been doing some great work building out social purpose real estate advisory and leading the voice in development in Canada. What are the emerging trends and current activities that you'd like to amplify?
Yeah, no, I think really over the last 10 years, we've been really talking about affordable housing, especially trying to target marginalized communities. But it's exciting to see now all levels of government, from the federal to municipal, are all leaning forward in regards to different initiatives. The two initiatives that we're really trying to streamline is around the rent-to-own program, leveraging our redevelopment projects that we're doing for individuals to lock into assets today. They don't have to move in for 2 to 3 years while we're building it, and then work out a profit, a rental number that works for them, while a percentage going into the down payment for when they move in 3 years after. So it's a 6-year program that we're going to be rolling out, hopefully Q1 of 23, for those looking to have home ownership but need a home right now.
That's great. That sounds good. Thank you for sharing. Carla, this question's for you. I know you recently developed a social purpose holding corporation, and you're now the CEO of an incredible company called Just Like Family. We didn't get into. What systems and ecosystems are you working on disrupting, and what role does your social purpose real estate play in this kind of work?
So this is actually, I think every system that I run into probably needs to be disrupted. So I don't know which one you want me to point a finger at first.
Pick your top ones.
So really what I'm looking at right now is franchising. So the franchise system. So Just Like Family is a home care company that we've purchased. It was a social acquisition. And I think it's changing capitalism from being a win-lose situation to a win-win. And I actually think that franchising was developed to be deeply relational, where you have a business model that works in one community that you're seeking to have in another, but it really got destroyed into something that was extractive. And I think what I'm trying to do is to reposition people into the franchise systems. And so, yeah, I guess that's the main one that's happening. And the rabbit hole is very, very deep. But every person I speak to now, they want to be part of this. This movement is compelling. So I'm super excited.
So it's going well for the most part?
Oh yeah, the first 6 months, it was interesting to say the least. I don't know. I can't swear on this, can I?
We're keeping it clean, but we definitely appreciate your honesty. Okay, so this next question is for Graham. Your work at the Trinity Center Foundation has inspired a lot. It's exponentially scaling, and we just want you to share more about this model and your work in the ecosystem.
Thanks, Blessed. And I wonder if there's anybody here on the call who, as we went over that phrase, social purpose real estate, was wondering what exactly we mean by that. And if I could sneak into how do we see the world and how's our work going, I would define social purpose real estate as being parcels of land and buildings which have probably been given, often by some colonial narrative. They often have a tax-exempt status, which is a way of the whole community investing in them. And there's a narrative around them saying that's our place. So certainly libraries, schools, hospitals, but also places of worship and so on. And so in our case, we would argue that the Christian church represents the largest single block of social purpose real estate outside of schools and hospitals in terms of land value. And if you put schools and hospitals that are faith-based, then you have another whole dimension as well. But just looking at communities of faith, that's our focus. There are about a quarter of Canada's 80,000 registered charities are faith-based organizations. About half of those own a place of worship. So usually it's a funny looking building with a steeple, but it's often on the corner of Main and Main where all the buses go through and the metro is there. And it's the place where poverty is the hardest and food security is felt most acutely. And the connection between different communities is often quite raw in those places. So our work is trying to look at those properties, realize that some of them are okay and they'll be fine in the future, but at least a third of them are in deep crisis right now. And those properties are coming out, in our view, too quickly into the speculative market. We don't have a strong enough social purpose real estate narrative or a social inclusion by social economy narrative. That's why I'm here today, to say, actually, these properties in some ways belong to us. And so our work is working with congregations who I would say before the pandemic, there were more who said, we think we could still make it on our own. We know that most things have died out and it's not our kids and our grandkids and our great grandkids left a long time ago, but we can still make it. All of a sudden after the pandemic, that has shifted, where those same congregational leaders are saying, we need the rest of this. They don't call it the social economy. They call it maybe the social sector, charities and nonprofits, but actually we need each other. And of course, the charitable foundations and municipalities, they're more on the side of the secular parts of the social sector than the religious side. And so our work is trying to bring those together. And just say one final thing. Probably the most exciting thing for us is we're working with 4 dioceses or regions or presbytery type of organizations, so regional church bodies, where they are trying to get it right. And in some cases, that's with housing. And the group that Carla just mentioned, we're really pleased to have been working and continue working closely with other church organizations. But we're trying to find ourselves in the middle between the faith-based organizations and the non-faith-based organizations. And sometimes there'll be housing coming out of that. Sometimes it'll be community hubs and or other outcomes. But that's what we're looking at. That's our view on the world. And it's so exciting to share that view with you guys today.
Thank you for sharing. Are there any other recent developments that you've worked on? Like, can you talk about the work that you're doing with the McDonald Foundation?
Yeah, so I think, yes. So in Montreal, we said to, a couple of the large granting foundations in Montreal, we said, could you help us really get the big church organizations together with the big foundations and the big charities, the ones who are already paying rent some other place? Could we put them all together? And as Carla said, these are going to disrupt all of their systems. Could we create a table where there's intentional disruption of all 3 or 4 of those elements? And we thought that was Montreal, because Montreal has a very low level of religiosity. We were surprised when the Calgary Foundation found out about it. They said, we want you guys in Calgary now. The same thing's happening in Calgary. And so that's really exciting. And probably the last thing in terms of very exciting things that are happening on that front is we're trying to create a new pre-development fund where housing may not be the primary outcome. And that will be through a bond that we've issued. And we hope to connect that with the Federal Social Finance Fund as well. We've got one version that will do that and one that just operates on its own, trying to help provide funds to the community organizations who are trying to see these transitions happen. So we're very thankful for our work in Montreal being something of a guide. And of course, Canada's very broad and many, many differences across the country as well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Keep up the great work. This next question is for Mike. You've been working with the co-op in Lawrence Heights community related to affordable housing and social purpose real estate. What are some of the wins and systemic barriers in your work?
Oh, okay. That's an interesting question. So Lawrence Heights, for those who don't know, is a TCHC project in Toronto. It's one of the revitalization areas that the TCHC is interested in. Most of you may have heard of Regent Park. It effectively was the Regent Park of North York, a very, very large development that is slated for revitalization. Phase 1 is complete. They are looking at phase 2 and phase 3. They are talking 3,000 units, including rebuilding the 600 units that were there for TCHC. And what I'm effectively doing is providing consulting advice to a cooperative formed of the residents, in particular the women of Lawrence Heights, that are interested in doing the revitalization themselves, so that it's not done by an outside force and an outside agency, and that it's focused on using the market units for the benefit of the residents of Lawrence Heights. So the redevelopment of TCHC is a given, but the way it was structured was 2,400 units was going to be offered to the private sector. Our goal is to allow 600 of those units to be owned by residents of both Lawrence Heights and the broader TCHC network. And you can do that if you control your own revitalization and control the benefits that are created through it. The thing that's been very frustrating to me is Regent Park triggered about $150 to $200 million worth of profits to the private sector, not one single dollar of which benefited the individuals who live there. They got a paltry, what was it, 15 units for affordable ownership to date. And that really doesn't serve the people that you're trying to revitalize. So that's been a focus of ours, but our primary overall focus is that we don't have a solution to the housing problem unless we have a solution that does not require grants and subsidies. Because if you want to do the solution through grants and subsidies, you need to figure out how to raise $1.2 trillion from government in Canada. And I'm betting that that kind of money is not available. So all of our work has focused very specifically on no grants, no subsidies, no tax write-downs. To the extent that with the new legislation in Ontario that's allowing us to waive development charges, if we went into a municipality with 1,000 or 2,000 units, we would have to cause them to raise their taxes by 20 to 30%. So we've predetermined that we won't accept the waiving, but we will look to municipalities to provide us with the guarantees we need to borrow the money to pay them. And so our model is very specific. You know, it's ownership. It's exclusively ownership. We should talk to dream makers. We have a lovely save to own program that never makes you a tenant. That's focused on people with incomes between $40,000 and $80,000, which starts with a $500 down payment. But from day one, you're an owner. You just don't have title until you make your 5% down. So there's certainly a lot of interactions that should happen because once you get rid of grants and subsidies, scale is not the issue. So we can talk about 2,400 units. You cannot talk about 2,400 units if you need grants and subsidies to do it. So currently what I've been smiling about and talking to friends about is I'm working on 10,000 units out of my daughter's former bedroom. And I laugh about it all the time. Knowledge is more important than money, it turns out. So yes, it's been an exciting time. And Lawrence Heights is a passion of mine because I fought with TCHC 20 years ago saying that I can allow 50% of your tenants a chance to own. And I was told by the CEO at that time that their tenants were not capable of ownership. And that is nuts. It's just completely. But what it turned out was important to that person was protecting the good tenants, keeping them in place to water down the bad tenants. And that's sort of unacceptable to me. You don't use people that way. Your whole purpose in life is to move people forward. And if the goal is to hold them back so it makes your job easier, there's something a little bit off in that regard.
Definitely. So if you had a magic wand and you could change something to with regulation, what would it be?
Oh, at this point in time, the regulations we're asking for are not insurmountable. They're all within their policy guidelines. My last step in the puzzle is Infrastructure Ontario money lent on the basis of it getting paid back when people sell. That last piece is all that I need to sort of put together a situation where somebody only pays an ongoing mortgage on 50% of the value of the unit. And that's the heart and soul of making ownership work for lower income people. And once you're allowed to do that, I've been smiling. I claim that I'm trying to produce housing for lower income people as a way of fighting poverty. But in truth, if you're fighting poverty, it's a reverse racism because everybody who's poor tends to be of color. And so you can fight poverty and still be in on an anti-racism policy without actually having to say it.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing. I have a question for Isaac again. In terms of the national housing strategy and the carve out for Black communities, what are your thoughts on this based on the development work that you've been able to facilitate in the past? What are some of the recommendations or actionable insights that you have for stakeholders around this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely a good start forward for CMHC and the federal government. We've been lobbying and pushing for more inclusiveness when it comes to the funding coming out from CMHC. But not only just the funding to build the homes, what's also important for us is also the supply chain for the homes that are being built, because home ownership is one piece of it. Employment and creation of small businesses within those marginalized communities is another piece of it. And then institutional relationships is another piece of it. And that's what really holistically creates sustainable and economically sustainable communities. And that's what Dream Legacy's whole notion has been around. How do we bridge the gap for underrepresented communities, especially the Black community, when it comes to driving home ownership, when it comes to tapping into the supply chain, and when it comes to creating more employment, and indirectly that will come with more home ownership. So when we saw the carve out, we were excited about it because now they're going to be funding Black nonprofits or Black developers within the development space to create homes. And our hope in our proposal is that as we're creating homes, so let's say we're creating 100 townhouses, and the total size of the budget is about $40 million. Our hope is that about 20% of the budget is going to companies and individuals within the community that we're trying to impact, so that we're not just providing homes, but we're providing dollars back into that community. And also half of those homes will not only just be for home ownership, but for affordable rent as well too. And then financial literacy layered through a wraparound service. so that we can move them from just rental to home ownership, but once they're financially capable of doing that. So we're excited to $1 million carve out. I think there's definitely more that needs to be added to that, and we're hoping through the social finance innovation and other funding gaps, we'll be able to participate in that.
That's great. And I have the same question for you. If you had a magic wand, what would you change for the regulations on both commercial and the residential side?
I think, and Mike said it best, I think it's working within the policies, but I think it's also that there's inclusiveness in the fund that goes out, and that there's a level of playing field for those that are trying to participate in that funding. Because representation both on who is doing the work and who is receiving the funding plays a key role on who is going to be in the properties. I remember when Regent Park was launched, through my real estate brokerage, we were fortunate to be able to sell units during those times in partnership with the brokerage firm and Baker and then Daniels at that time. And I remember a lot of the families that were looking through the windows around the corner, seeing the long lineup of agents line up to select units. And we will go into those Toronto community housing and say, you know what, you could be part of this line too. But the reason why is not because they lacked capital, it's because they lacked access. And that's a key component in everything that we're trying to do, is working with municipalities, provincial and federal, to provide access to those that right now don't have it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I believe Adeola from Ascendi Capital is here now. So if you want to go ahead and quickly introduce yourself, and then I have a question for you.
Thank you. Sorry I'm late. I'm happy to be here. My name is Adeola Oladimiji. I'm the managing partner of Ascendi Capital. It's a private investment management company with a focus on real assets, especially real estate. Thank you.
Perfect. So I know you recently migrated to Canada a few years ago, and then since you built Ascendi Capital, not only developed the vision for affordable housing, but you also raised capital. Can you share your journey with us?
Yeah, thank you. The journey was rough. I can tell you that. But the good thing about it is that I think when it comes to affordability, I think there are ways we could go around this. To add to what Isaac just talked about, I think the bulk of the problems lies with the government. When talking about affordability, you have to put in place pro-construction policies and incentives for developers. I know CMHC is trying to do their bit in terms of putting in place a structure for Black community to access funds for development. But in BC and Ontario, for instance, there are policies that are just anti-development and construction. And that ties into the Black communities into the, and if you look at it, some of the things that I've seen out, I've identified as ways to solve this problem is, if you look at some of the abandoned offices, if you look at some of the abandoned hotels, these are properties that could be repurposed for affordability, because there has to be affordability before home ownership, because you can't jump from, I have to be able to afford one first before to live in a house before I can dream of buying a house. So we have to take it step by step. First, can I afford to even rent this apartment? So that comes with a job. Then if I can afford to rent this apartment, how long is it going to take me to be able to put together some funding, even a 10% down payment? According to the National Bank of Canada, it's going to take about, to even buy a condo is about 41 months, right? For just an average home to put money together for 10% down payment. So how long is it going to take it? So you have to repurpose all those kind of buildings, abandoned motels, abandoned offices. Let's repurpose them for affordability. Then we'll start solving those crises. Those are, in terms of my journey, in terms of having to address that problem, those are the ways I think we can do that. Those are the things I've seen that we could do to fast track this problem, to get us out of this this problem that we're in right now. That's what I've seen, and I think that will help us get to that. I mean, we need to have about 5.8 million units by 2030 for to address this problem. But we are not building that much. So to fix that problem, let's see the vintage properties that we have right now. Can we repurpose them? Can we upgrade them to be affordable, to be livable, before we can get to point of, okay, let's make construction. So we have to complement construction with repurposing what we have that are not in use right now.
That's a great suggestion. Can you tell us about the development of units that you have and how much capital you've been able to raise for this?
We have 44 units in Edmonton, and currently working on another 48, and we're working on another 120 units in Edmonton. For I think this the journey in terms of raising the money was rather rough, but we were able to raise about 4.9 million to close our 44 units in Edmonton just about 10 months ago. But raising the money, because I mean, I'm relatively new in Canada, so it wasn't that wasn't a smooth ride. It was pretty difficult, but with the support of the likes of Isaac, with the encouragement, and Victor, we're able to get to that.
That's great. And how long have you been here?
It's going to about 4 years now. I moved to Canada in 2019, March 2019.
Remarkable work. Thank you. This next question is for Carla. As a leader in the social innovation space, what are some of the emerging trends in social purpose real estate across Canada, in the United States, or any other jurisdictions that you feel could be amplified or should be amplified?
I think the biggest thing that we're seeing in the States that we're now seeing come to Canada is really a focus on moving from direct debt into equity. So direct equity. And so some of the impact investors in the States, definitely in New York City, they would say that 5 years ago that the majority of their portfolio was debt-based. And then now it's actually the opposite. It's 80% equity that they're doing and 20% debt, and therefore able to leverage existing lenders and those existing systems that are in place, and just changing what they realize that their focus is. And so I think I'm starting to see that in Canada, obviously with the social purpose holding company, and having done one of the first social acquisitions in Canada, leveraging direct equity investments rather than debt. It's something that I think we're going to continue to see. Scale Collaborative on Vancouver Island is really leaning into that, of using equity rather than debt. And I think when we start thinking that way and using existing levers, we're able to not just rely on policy change and actually be the change ourselves.
Thank you. I love that. This next question is for Graham. What's the ultimate goal of the Trinity Center Foundation? What's your call to action for all Canadians related to social purpose real estate?
Thanks so much for that question. Our ultimate goal is to look at this stock of 12,000 properties that are moving right now, and to be able to sleep at night when we look back at it and say, we did a great job. And that doesn't mean that some of them will not be sold in the private sector without any solution that we can find, because there will be some that just need to go on the market. And frankly, we're not going to find a social purpose real estate solution to an existing piece of social purpose real estate. It's not going to happen every time. But there are times where we're going to look at that and say, you know what, not only did we see a great housing project come up, but it took something that Mike said, and it actually did it because the church owned the land in the first place. We didn't just behave like a traditional property developer. Or we did do something where some of those new ideas in terms of social finance came together. We did get 3 or 4 foundations to take an equity stake in an old church that was difficult to turn into a community hub because debt frankly didn't work, and we did it. So it's really taking that stock of property that particularly the church owns. You might have heard me mentioning the church and wonder whether how we deal with other faiths. What we find is we don't have a huge supply of empty mosques in Canada or empty gurudwaras. That day may come, but we're very pleased at putting 3 of Edmonton's Muslim communities into one of its oldest Christian churches. We did that on on Good Friday, which was also during Ramadan, and it made for the best news story we've ever had. So I mean, that was an example of like a best case, fantastic outcome for us. But if I may just turn the question a little bit, I would also like to see us use this opportunity to deal with issues of race. Mike, you mentioned it earlier, and we've been chatting a little bit in the chat here too. And I just want to salute some of the best ideas that I've had when we first started thinking. And although they weren't specifically housing work, Mike was one of the people who really did have faith in workarounds. And I thought, Mike, how is it that you have faith in so many of these workarounds? And as I've continued to work with more Indigenous people and other groups that don't have necessarily any kind of privilege coming into that situation, I realized faith in workarounds is something that we can give when we have privilege. And I think that's something that conversation like this can do. So I'd like to see that the white privilege, I'm going to call it that, of the Christian church in Canada is used to really push these levers and do the innovation, that we are not on the backside. And I would say this, I would say, with the notable and amazing exception of the United Church of Canada and the Property Resource Development Corporation that Carla just mentioned, the church is mostly behind on these things. And we used to be ahead. We used to be really ahead on those things. So maybe that's another answer, is I'd like to see us understand this, the privilege in land that we have in the Christian church in Canada, and be seen to be ahead of a wave of change and calling for these new models forward in here.
So what do you think that we can do to potentially mitigate white supremacy in this space?
Well, and I would probably just differentiate between white supremacy and white privilege. I don't know much about white supremacy in this, and I don't see a lot of white supremacy in the way I would define it. I see a lot of people who hold white privilege, and they don't know how that happened. That's something that came generations before them. They're sitting there and they don't know how. I would typify that as group of a dozen great grannies holding on to an old Presbyterian church, and they want to do the right thing. They're holding on to a 30,000 square foot building. They've got $10 million in the bank, and they just don't know which way to turn. So that's the kind of white privilege that I think we see a lot of. Look, let's be really direct here, guys. Of all the churches that have closed in Canada, they have been the blackest, brownest, poorest churches that have closed. Those are the ones that go to private development first. They're often in the most priority neighborhoods. In my own Anglican church, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm a priest in the Anglican church. I lead one of the big downtown churches in Montreal. It's our Afro-Caribbean churches that have closed first, right? And it pains me, and I've written about this in the Anglican Journal. Uncle Johnson, the warden of the Anglican church, born in Jamaica, he will defend 16th century English behavior more than the whitest of the white person. You look at this like, Uncle Johnson, brother, why are you why are you being so white? Why are you doing that? There were jails for slaves in the Anglican churches in Kingston, Jamaica, and yet you're doing this. So whiteness gets into all of our instruments, especially in the church. And I would love to see us take stock of those with love for each other, with love for Uncle Johnson. Not to chastise him or that kind of thing, but we haven't been honest about how this has impacted urban poverty. The wealth of the church has not done very well for urban poverty, and we could do so much more. And the rays of hope are there. Here we are today.
Okay, thank you. So one of our panels yesterday, there was a lot of discussion on land, Black movements, and it's hard to develop on the scene of the crime if it is like a bit of a crime scene. So as a faith leader, are you currently collaborating with other racialized groups around this kind of work?
We are, and I would say, again, I'm going to use a big generalization to answer this. And of course, with generalizations, there are all kinds of problems with this. But can you think of a church where there is, and let me go back to a mixed-use housing development where somebody who's benefited, as Isaac said, from affordability is now preparing to become the owner, right? The system is often working against that person because rents raise high, their employability doesn't work, they don't have the security of owning the property, they don't have other privileges. They're trying to get out of affordability into ownership. In the same way, think of your typical urban church building. Who's actually in there? It's the Korean church, the Filipino church, the Nigerian church. They're renting while the older Anglican, United, Catholic, Lutheran church is still there in the morning. We would love to see the Filipino church come to own that building And maybe it should be Korean, Filipino, Nigerian together, perhaps a very liberal church, maybe a more conservative church as well. Maybe we can help them talk to each other too. Maybe there are 2 or 3 churches that own that place now. So one of the ways of solving this, of whiteness within the church property, you know, maybe it's a micro slice. I think it's a big slice of social purpose real estate, but that's just our focus. But, you know, wouldn't it be amazing if we saw that happen? You know, in our church in Montreal, we have a big refugee charity that's there. And often we have Syrian women and a lot of Iranian women walking around that church, and they look like they own the place. And people come in there and they're like, I saw an Iranian woman. She looks like she owns this 150-year-old church. I said, yeah. That's because we work to help her feel like this is her place and that she owns it. And so we can do that. And that sense of I own this community asset, I believe creates other aspects of stability in an urban environment. Of course, we know isolation is the #1 cause of extremism. How do we counter extremism? The creation of resilient local community. How do we do that? Through ownership. Housing for sure, but other community assets. That to me is the social purpose real estate dream.
Thank you. This question for Isaac. Do you experience any anti-Black racism as a developer in the ecosystem, or is it a neutral sector?